Great. Well, we'll begin as the last few participants join us. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for this important Lunch with the Friends virtual program, Climate Change Impacts of the Proposed PolyMet and Twin Metals Mines. I'm Chris Knopp, the Executive Director of Friends of the Boundary Waters Wilderness, and for over 40 years, Friends of the Boundary Waters Wilderness has been the leader in protecting the boundary waters and the broader Quetico Superior ecosystem. And we've been that leader because of you. We're a people, a membership-based organization, and you are the strength of our organization, both in the past, today, and in the future. Today, our work focuses on three areas: wilderness, people, and community. For the wilderness, there are two mines and one threat that present an existential threat to the wilderness. Those two mines are PolyMet and Twin Metals, and they're the topic of today's presentation. For people, our No Boundaries to the Boundary Waters connects people of all backgrounds, young people of all backgrounds, to the boundary waters through classroom education, online programs, and scholarships for wilderness canoe trips. For community, we recognize that the communities that are gateways to the boundary waters and the wilderness itself have a shared fate. And we have a new community coordinator based in Ely, Hudson Ledeen. And beginning next week, we are sponsoring movies at the Ely State Theater. So we're excited to have Hudson in Ely. And if you're in Ely, please connect with him virtually or other ways. This is a truly an extraordinary program dealing with an existential threat to not just the boundary waters, but our world itself. Last year, we commissioned Dr. Stephen Emerman to prepare a report on the climate change impacts of the proposed Twin Metals and PolyMet mines. And what we're having today, Dr. Steve Emerman is presenting a summary of his reports. Of his report. His findings are also summarized in our upcoming issue of our newsletter, which is coming out any day here. Steve Emerman is the owner of Maylock Consulting. He's an expert on the environmental impacts of mining. He has done consulting work literally all over the globe: North America, South America, Europe, Africa, as well as the United States here. Climate change disrupts not just economies, but it's but socially, politically, and it impacts those that are most vulnerable in our society. The last 7 years have been the warmest years on record, and there is no end in sight to that. Before we begin here, I'm going to present some housekeeping items here. At the bottom of your screen here, you'll see a Q&A button. Please present your questions to us in the Q&A area there. In the chat area, we'll provide some information, and you may also make comments there. On the far right-hand side, you'll see of your screen there at the very bottom, you should see something that says live transcript. If you want a closed caption where you can see the words at the bottom, please click on that, and you can have a closed caption at the bottom. So without further ado, it is my great honor to present Dr. Stephen Emerman, who will speak about the climate change impact of the proposed PolyMet and Twin Metal mines.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll be speaking on the climate change impact of the proposed PolyMet and Twin Metals mines. And this is me. I was a professor of geology and hydrology for 31 years. Now I'm a full-time mining consultant. I've evaluated mining projects on all continents except not yet Australia. I'm the owner of Maylock Consulting. Our specialty is environmental impacts of mining. Okay, I'm going to be talking about two proposed copper-nickel mines. These are the PolyMet and Twin Metals mines. These are in the farthest northeast corner of Minnesota, right on the edge, only a few miles from the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness. You see both mines, PolyMet mine and Twin Metals mine, are very close to many bodies of water. Okay, I'm going to be talking specifically about the greenhouse gas emissions by these proposed copper-nickel mines, and asking two questions. The first is, based upon trends in the mining industry, especially copper nickel mining, what should be the greenhouse gas emissions from these mines? And what are the two mines projecting as the greenhouse gas emissions? That is, I'm going to be comparing industry trends with projections for these mines. Okay, so first, just a little background on greenhouse gases. The first is that even though carbon dioxide gets a lot of attention, actually all gas molecules with 3 or more atoms are greenhouse gases. Even water vapor, which has 3 atoms, is a greenhouse gas. 1 ton of methane has the global warming potential of 25 tons of carbon dioxide. 1 ton of nitrous oxide has the global warming potential of 298 tons of carbon dioxide. We usually express greenhouse gas emissions as tons of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions, or we just say tons of carbon dioxide. And that's what I'll be saying through the rest of this talk, how many tons of carbon dioxide per year. But you understand this includes all of the other greenhouse gases. Okay, now this is a little technical, but just bear with me, okay? We put greenhouse gas emissions in various categories. The first, what's called Scope 1 emissions, or it's called direct emissions, or it's called on-site emissions. So these are the emissions released into the atmosphere from sources on the mine site controlled by the mining company. So this could be emissions from blasting, diesel fuel consumption for drilling, loading, hauling, liquid propane gas consumption for heating. It includes emissions from destruction of forests and peatlands, if those are carried out. If electricity is generated by the mining company on site, that's a Scope 1 emission. If the mining company is doing smelting and refining on site, again, those are Scope 1 emissions. Okay? Now, Scope 2 emissions, also called indirect emissions. Those are the emissions released into the atmosphere due to the consumption of an energy commodity that was not generated by the mining company. So if a mining company is purchasing electricity from off-site, produced by somebody else, those emissions are the Scope 2 emissions. Now, what PolyMet and Twin Metals have in common is both of them are going to purchase electricity from Minnesota Power. Okay, so electricity generation is then a Scope 2 emission, an indirect emission. They're not going to do refining and smelting. They're going to produce a concentrate that will be shipped overseas for refining. Okay, so that in the case of these two mines, the Scope 1 emissions, that is on-site, plus the Scope 2 emissions, that is due to electricity generation, the two of those together we could call the in-state emissions, the emissions within the state of Minnesota. Okay, only thing left out of here is that Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions do not include the emissions from shipping the concentrate to where it will be refined. So some of those emissions will occur by shipping it, concentrates by truck on roads on Minnesota to Duluth, to a port, but those are not included in Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, and I'll be talking about those more later. Okay, now Scope 3 emissions. These are all other emissions that are generated indirectly by the mining activity and which are not controlled by the mining company. So it could be fabrication of a product that includes the mined metal. It could be recycling of the metal. It's everything done with that metal until the metal finally is permanently disposed into a landfill. Okay, so cradle to grave emissions are Scope 1 plus Scope 2 plus Scope 3. Okay, now Scope 3 emissions are very rarely actually calculated, and there's no standard methodology for doing so. And I'm not going to be talking about that in terms of the PolyMet and Twin Metals mines. Instead, I'm going to be talking about what's called cradle-to-gate emissions. Okay, these are all the emissions involved from taking a metal from the ore body to a refined metal ready for fabrication into a product. Okay, they're called the gateway to a product. So cradle-to-gate emissions are Scope 1 plus Scope 2 plus shipping plus refining. okay? Now, mining and greenhouse gas emissions. Mining is a major contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. This is a very recent study, February 2020, in Nature, the most prestigious scientific journal. So 2 quotes just from the summary. Overall, we estimate the greenhouse gas emissions associated with primary mineral and metal production was equivalent to approximately 10% of the global energy-related greenhouse gas emissions in 2018. Okay, so 10% of global warming is due to mining activity. Okay, next quote is very important. For copper mining, fuel consumption increased by 130% and electricity consumption increased by 32% per unit of mined copper in Chile from 2001 to 2017, largely due to decreasing ore grade. Okay, and this is a very important point. As ore bodies have a lower grade, as they have less and less copper in a body of ore, it takes more greenhouse gases emitted and more fuel consumed and more electricity consumed to produce the same amount of copper. Okay, that is because a lot of energy and fuel consumption and greenhouse gas emissions are just related to the size of the ore body. Okay, you've got to mine that ore body, you've got to load the ore body, haul the ore body, crush the ore body, concentrate the ore body. All of the same processes have to go on regardless of how much copper you eventually get out of the ore body. Okay, now with that, let's look at key characteristics of these proposed copper nickel mines, PolyMet and Twin Metals. Both will be mining a sulfide ore. PolyMet is an open pit mine. Twin Metals would be an underground mine. I especially want to draw your attention to the grades of the ore bodies. Okay, and these are not fractions, these are percentages. PolyMet would mine an ore body with 0.26% copper and only 0.04% nickel. Twin Metals would mine an ore body with 0.69% copper and 0.22% nickel. Okay, now these ore bodies are low grade even by contemporary standards of low grade ores. Okay, for example, let's look at historical trends in Australia. Quite interesting that in the 19th century, ore bodies had like 25% copper, nickel. Those ore bodies are exhausted. Grades have gradually declined till about the present time. Worldwide, typical ore bodies are about 1% copper and 1% nickel. Okay, so by contrast, PolyMet 0.2% copper, 0.04% nickel, and likewise for Twin Metals, these bodies are ultra low grade, even in comparison with global declining ore grades. Okay, just to emphasize this point, the diagram on the left shows energy consumption as a function of ore grade. Okay, on the y-axis we have energy intensity, that is gigajoules of energy per ton of copper. On the x-axis we have ore grade. Look at this dashed line, which is the best fit relationship for a mine that does mining plus concentration, that doesn't do refining also. So we see that as we go to ore grades below 1% and especially below 0.5%, a dramatic increase in the energy required to produce a given ton of copper. Okay, look at the diagram on the left. Greenhouse gas emissions as a function of ore grade. On the y-axis, this is kilograms of carbon dioxide per kilogram of copper. Ore grade of copper on the x-axis. We see as we go to lower ore grades, and especially as we get below 1%, 0.5%, a dramatic increase in kilograms of carbon dioxide per kilograms of copper. Now, pyrometallurgy refers to the refining of sulfide ores. So those are the ore bodies that would be mined by the PolyMet and Twin Metals mines. Okay, so this is the report I wrote. Comparison of projected greenhouse gas emissions with industry trends for the proposed North Met and Twin Metals copper nickel mines northeastern Minnesota. Now, actually, the name of the mine is North Met. PolyMet is the name of the mining company, but usually in Minnesota, people talk about the PolyMet mine. Okay, so I will continue that practice. Now, before I wrote my report, there were 23 other academic studies of energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions from copper and nickel mining. All had different objectives, all used different data sets and methodologies, all used different conclusions, but not completely different conclusions, differences in the numbers. Okay, so the question I was asking is, of all of these different studies, how do we decide which are most applicable to the PolyMet and Twin Metals mines? So I worked with a set of priorities. First priority is that I favor the most recent studies, having the most complete databases and using the most sophisticated methodologies. But I was very suspicious of clear outliers, even if they were more recent. And I tried to pick out estimates from a small set of reliable studies, then pick and choose estimates from all the available studies. Okay, next, I favored estimates specific to the circumstances of the PolyMet and Twin Metals mines. That meant estimates specific to open pit mining for PolyMet or underground mining for Twin Metals. For the cradle to gate estimates, it meant estimates specific to sulfide ores. And finally, I favored the on-site and in-state estimates that took the ore grade into account. And I've explained why that's so important. Okay, let's just look at a couple of examples of my reasoning, and then we'll look at the results. Okay, so this is on-site diesel fuel consumption rates for production of copper concentrate, a few studies along those lines. I favored Rotsert and Schmidt, the most recent study. They estimated consumption of diesel fuel separately for open pit mining and underground mining. What I really liked is that they looked at diesel fuel consumption per ton of ore. Okay, that's most applicable for low-grade ores because you're still going to have to crush and load and haul and drill that entire ore body, regardless of how much copper is present. Coupler and Coupler, a very interesting study, looked at fuel consumption and greenhouse gas emissions as a function of both ore grade and depth. You get a very wide range of estimates depending upon which of their equations you use, so I'm somewhat suspicious. It is interesting that these most recent estimates give the lowest diesel fuel consumption rates for Twin Metals and PolyMet, and we would get much bigger values if we used earlier studies. And anyway, we'll keep that in mind. Okay, electricity consumption rates for production of copper concentrate. For underground mining, again, I favor Rotsert and Schmidt. Focus on electricity per ton of ore, specific to underground mining. Brandeis is actually forecast, not actual data. I'm suspicious of Coupler and Coupler. I favor Fagerstrom 2015, specific to PolyMet, electricity consumption per ton of ore, so more appropriate for a low-grade ore. Okay, just one more example. Cradle to gate total energy consumption rates for copper production. Most recent study that focused on sulfide ore was Rankin. Rankin actually used the same database and methodology as some earlier studies. Okay, so here's our best estimates, separated into on-site, that is scope 1, in-state, scope 1 plus scope 2, and then global, that is cradle to gate, which is scope 1 plus scope 2 plus shipping plus refining. And we won't dwell too much on this table. Okay, I do want to emphasize that conversion to electricity to greenhouse gas emissions depends upon the power source. Both of these mining projects would buy their electricity from Minnesota Power. Kind of interesting that by Minnesota standards, Minnesota Power is a relatively inefficient generator of electricity, still being over-reliant on coal. Okay, Now, let's compare the best estimates, industry trends, and mining company projections. Okay, let's start with what's projected by the mining company. Okay, direct greenhouse emissions produced on-site, indirect greenhouse emissions produced by the production of electricity within Minnesota. So the sum of those two we could call the in-state emissions. Okay, now, so many tons of carbon dioxide, is that a little, is that a lot? Well, let's just compare that with passenger vehicles. According to the projections from PolyMet, their in-state greenhouse gas emissions would be equivalent to putting on Minnesota roads an additional 137,540 passenger vehicles. That's a typical mileage, typical miles per gallon. Okay. For Twin Metals, according to their estimates, the in-state emissions would be equivalent to putting on Minnesota roads another additional 237,190 passenger vehicles. Okay. That does not include the emissions from shipping and refining. Okay. But in terms of shipping, as I mentioned before, keep in mind that some of the shipping is going to take place on roads within Minnesota. Okay, that is the copper concentrate, the nickel concentrate will be shipped by truck to the port in Duluth and then overseas for refining. Okay, so let's consider Twin Metals, for example, 258,000 tons of copper and nickel concentrates per year. Let's just suppose they ship that in 2-ton trucks to Duluth. That's 350 trucks per day doing a 200-mile round trip. 161.8 grams of carbon dioxide per ton mile is typical for trucks. Okay, that is shipping on Minnesota roads would add another 9,203 tons of carbon dioxide per year. Okay, that actually is fairly minor compared with the other greenhouse gas emissions on this chart. But do keep in mind, if that's your road that you're living on, and you're going to have 350 trucks going round trip per day, 24 hours a day for the rest of your life, I guess you would notice that. Okay, now let's focus more on comparing the industry trends with the mining company projections. Okay, we see industry trends and projections by PolyMet about a little more than twice as big. For indirect greenhouse gas emissions, industry trends, projections by PolyMet about twice as big. Okay, and as a PolyMet is estimating their greenhouse gas emissions to be about twice what you'd expect from industry trends, and that actually is a correct procedure. Okay, that is PolyMet is being appropriately conservative. Okay, they're taking industry trends and they're giving themselves plenty of margin of error. They don't want to produce much more greenhouse gas emissions than they claim that they will. Now, I have many criticisms of PolyMet, but their estimate of greenhouse gas emissions is not one of them, okay? Now, Twin Metals is a different story, okay? We see industry trends for direct greenhouse gas emissions from the mine site, 157,000 tons of carbon dioxide per year, but Twin Metals is saying 58,071 tons of carbon dioxide per year. That is, projections by Twin Metals for on-site greenhouse gas emissions are about 1/3 of mining industry trends. Now, why is that discrepancy so important? Okay, now actually Twin Metals tells us why that's so important. This is by Twin Metals. This is their scoping environmental assessment worksheet, which they submitted to Minnesota DNR. This is a quote: "Preliminary greenhouse gas emissions calculations show carbon dioxide equivalent emissions would be 58,072 tons per year, which is well below the threshold for a major source of air emissions of 100,000 tons per year in Minnesota. This is based on the mine heaters being used at maximum capacity 24 hours per day, 7 days per week, and 6 months out of the year." Okay, so Twin Metals is telling us they will be well below the threshold for a major source of air emissions. Okay, now why is that so important? Because if you're a source of major air emissions, this according to the Clean Air Act, you go into a special category where you require a PSD permit. PSD meaning prevention of significant deterioration. And there's a whole body of regulation you have to follow if you are a major source of air emissions. That includes installation of the best available control technology, air quality analysis, additional impacts analysis, public involvement, and Twin Metals does not want us to know right now that they will be in that category. Okay, but what could they have done wrong in their calculation? So this table, this is from that same document, Scoping Environmental Assessment Worksheet. Okay, so here's their final answer, 58,071 tons of carbon dioxide per year. How do we get there? We have liquid propane gas for heating. We have water-based blasting emissions. So those are two sources of emissions. And we could ask what has been left out of here. I guess if I was teaching a class, I would just stop until a student said what is being left out, but I won't do that now. Okay, what about the greenhouse gas emissions from consuming 20,700,000 liters of diesel fuel per year? Now, I didn't make that up, that number. This table is from that same Twin Metals Scoping Environmental Assessment Worksheet. There we have it, 20,700,000 liters of diesel fuel. Is that supposed to burn with zero greenhouse gas emissions? Okay, Twin Metals does know about that, and they promise they will take care of that later. This is from that same document. In the environmental impact statement, greenhouse gas information would be refined by inclusion of greenhouse gas emissions from certain on-site mobile sources of emissions, including haul trucks and loaders. So Twin Metals knows about that. They'll take care of it later. Okay, but it really isn't so hard. The CO2 emission factor for diesel fuel is well known. It's 73.18 kilograms of carbon dioxide per million British thermal units. So if you know how much diesel fuel you're going to be burning, you know exactly what the greenhouse gas emissions will be right now. There's no need to do that later. Okay, so let's see what we have so far. We have emissions from liquid propane gas, that's from Twin Metals. Water-based blasting emulsions, that's from Twin Metals. Diesel fuel, Twin Metals gave us the amount, the volume of diesel fuel, and the simple calculation gives us the greenhouse gas emissions. And that gives us total on-site emissions of 119,162 tons of carbon dioxide per year, and now we are well above the threshold for a major source of air emissions. Okay, but what else has been left out? What about greenhouse gas emissions from destruction of peatlands? Okay, we're just all in the same document, Scoping Environmental Assessment Worksheet. The project area includes 912.4 acres of peatlands, okay, almost 1,000 acres of peatlands is going to be removed, destroyed to create the mine, okay? Now, so how much carbon is stored in those Minnesota peatlands? Here's a very interesting document. Loss of the carbon contained in 1,000 acres of peatland would release approximately 2.7 million metric tons of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, increasing Minnesota's total annual emission of carbon dioxide by 2% above 2005 levels. So simply destroying 1,000 acres of peatland would have a major impact on total annual emissions from the state of Minnesota. And that is not propaganda from Friends of the Boundary Waters Wilderness. That is from a report by Minnesota DNR. Okay, and that's almost exactly what's going to be destroyed in creating the Twin Metals mine. Okay, 912.4 acres. That destruction will release 2,715,519 tons of carbon dioxide. Okay, total. Now, if you're wondering how we got from 2.7 million and why that became greater than 2.7 million. The quote is talking about metric tons, but everywhere else in this talk, I'm talking about US short tons. That is 2,000 pounds. Okay, anyway, 2.7 million tons of carbon dioxide. Now, most of that will probably be released in the first couple years of the mining operation, simply to construct the mining project. Okay, but the mine will run for 25 years. So suppose we spread that out over 25 years. we have 108,621 tons of carbon dioxide per year. Okay, now we've now put Twin Metals far, far above the threshold for a major source of greenhouse gas emissions. That is 100,000 tons per year. Okay, liquid propane gas from Twin Metals, water-based blasting emulsions from Twin Metals, diesel fuel. I did the calculation, no big deal, but the volume of diesel fuel came from Twin Metals. The area of peatland came from Twin Metals, and it's a simple calculation. Okay, so now we're up to 227,783 tons of carbon dioxide per year. We still have not included emissions from forest and wetland destruction. Okay, but one thing I want to emphasize, let me go back to the previous slide. Let's look at these values, okay? The biggest number here is the emissions from peatland destruction. That's about the same as emissions from all other sources combined. Okay, so the most important source of on-site greenhouse gas emissions is not diesel fuel or propane gas or blasting, but the destruction of peatlands. Okay, now there's nothing Twin Metals can do about this. It doesn't matter if they use electric vehicles, they use robots, they use any other technological advance, they still have to destroy these wetlands to create this mining project on this site. Okay, so the carbon dioxide from peatland destruction is an irreducible part of that mining plan. And with that, I can summarize. Okay, so low-grade ore bodies result in high greenhouse gas emissions per quantity of copper and nickel. According to mining company projections, in-state emissions by the PolyMet and Twin Metals mines would be equivalent to 137,540 and 237,190 passenger vehicles on Minnesota roads, respectively. Okay, if we add those up together, we have almost 500,000 more passenger vehicles on Minnesota roads. This does not include the emissions from driving that concentrate on Minnesota roads to Duluth. Okay. The projected on-site emissions by the Twin Metals mine are about 1/3 of mining industry trends, even taking the low-grade ore into account. This low projection would place Twin Metals well below the threshold for a major source of emissions. Finally, including diesel fuel consumption and peatland destruction would place Twin Metals far above the threshold for a major source of air emissions. And what I want to leave you with is that the major source of on-site emissions is peatland destruction. And this will not be affected by electrical vehicles or the electric mine or robots or any other technological advances. And with that, I'll let Chris discuss the take action.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Emerman, for that great presentation that goes into details and the specifics behind the greenhouse gas emission calculations there. A couple of action items for people that are interested in protecting the boundary waters in Lake Superior and addressing these climate change impacts that PolyMet and Twin Metals would create. I've been working with a number of legislative leaders to pass a Prove It First bill in Minnesota. The Prove It First bill would require, before PolyMet and Metals could open a copper sulfide mine, that there has to be evidence that a copper sulfide mine has operated safely elsewhere in the United States in a similar environment for at least 10 years and has been closed for at least 10 years without causing pollution before a copper sulfide mine could be opened in Minnesota. And it's a common sense request. And we believe that common sense should govern in environmental protection here in Minnesota. So call Governor Walz and tell him to support Prove It First. And you can go to our website and place a request to either thank your legislator if that legislator is supporting Prove It First, or to request your legislator to support Prove It First. And we are a nonprofit organization, and it is through your support that we're able to protect the boundary waters. There were a number of interesting things in Dr. Emerman's presentation, and it is that sort of this very important trend that we have, low-grade ores that are being used today, and that PolyMet and Twin Metals are even in the context of low-grade ores are even lower-grade ores, and that means more energy consumption and more greenhouse gas emissions. That is something that is kind of baked into it, and is a really important part of what Dr. Emerman was talking about here. The other interesting comment issue that Dr. Emerman brought up was that PolyMet its calculation of greenhouse gases kind of conforms to what would be acceptable scientific and professional presentation. But Twin Metals is playing some games here with respect to its on-site emissions, and the reason they're doing that is they want to avoid a particular type of regulatory scrutiny. It's trying to get under a threshold of 100,000 tons per year of CO2 equivalent emissions. Dr. Emerman, why don't you talk again on that point there, because it's an important issue with respect to Twin Metals here.
Okay, let me do this with reference to a couple of slides, okay? First thing I want to point out is that they're nowhere close to being under 100,000 tons per year of carbon dioxide, okay? Twin Metals is only including liquid propane gas, water-based blasting emulsions, that's 58,072 tons. They've left out the most important things of all, which are diesel fuel consumption and peatland destruction, okay? Now, just to go back to another slide, this is where Twin Metals doesn't want to go, okay? A major source of air emissions. Now you're in a whole different area of regulation. It's according to the Clean Air Act, public involvement, best available control technology. This is where they don't want to go. PolyMet has been through all of that. Twin Metals will have to do that, okay? But as I would say, at some point, they will have to admit that they're a major source of air emissions that certainly would have to come out in the environmental impact statement. They don't want to admit that yet, okay? That is what I'm just trying to speak from what I imagine they're thinking, okay? They want to keep the ball in play. They want to move toward the stage where environmental impact statement would be written on their behalf, okay? So they want to keep the public thinking that they would not be a major source of air emissions, which is simply absurd, okay? The simplest calculation shows that they would be. And the main thing is that, yeah, you can, of course, you can keep the emissions pretty low if you leave out the most important factors, okay? But they've told us how much diesel fuel they're going to burn, okay? They say we'll figure out later, like it's difficult, which it isn't, okay? Because it's a very simple conversion, a volume of diesel fuel to so many tons of carbon dioxide, okay?
Great, thank you, Dr. Emerman. We have a series of questions related to the peatlands and wetlands destruction here, and perhaps Dr. Emerman, if you want to go to the slide that shows the Twin Metals report that deals with the with this here. And so the question is that, okay, Twin Metals is an underground mine, so how can it destroy these peatlands here?
Well, they have a project area, okay, and this is the area of direct impacts, and I believe that that whole project area is about 3,000 acres. It's 3,000 something, okay? So actually about a third of that is peatlands, okay? Now, this is the area upon which they're going to put mining infrastructure. They're going to put their filter tailing storage facility. They're going to put all the facilities for processing and concentrating the ore. There's no way there's no way this is going to happen without destroying the wetlands. Okay, so possibly, could we have an underground mine with functioning wetlands on top of that mine? Wow, I would sure like to see a plan for that. I have not seen a plan for that. Okay, so that seems pretty unrealistic to me. Okay, I don't know of that kind of thing anywhere in the world.
And as we've seen in the Twin Metals mine plan, and as you discussed in one of your previous presentations, there's essentially going to be a mountain of filter tailings right on the shores of Birch Lake there. And so right there you have, that's part of the footprint, and then you have these other aspects of the infrastructure associated with the mine. So the fact that they're boring under mine doesn't mean there's not a surface impact. There's sort of a dual aspect to it. And what you see on the very first slide related to the Twin Metals mine plan site, there it shows the footprint of the mine. It does have a substantial surface impact as well here.
I will go to that slide, Chris. There we go. Okay. So what is in red? This is the area of direct impact for the Twin Metals mine. Okay. And then what's in yellowish, orangish, is the area of direct impact for the PolyMet mine. Okay. And anyway, we see really how very close those areas of direct impact are to a great number of water bodies. Okay.
And what we see, Dr. Emerman, on that sort of tail that comes from the red there, that's the power infrastructure that would be in place there to provide power to Twin Metals there.
That's correct.
And there was a question about the peatland impact here, the wetlands destruction here, as far as is this going to happen on an annual basis, or how will the wetlands be destroyed here? Would it? I imagine there were. It's not spread out over necessarily evenly the life of the mine. That there will be certain impacts that will happen weighted towards the beginning, but then there will be continued impacts. I don't know if the answer to that, Dr. Emerman.
Well, if I look at this amount, this is the amount of carbon dioxide that would be emitted by destroying those peatlands. That's 2.7 million tons of carbon dioxide. Most of that is going to occur during construction of the mine. It is probably during the first 2 years. Okay, now that's a pretty hefty slug of carbon dioxide. We have the quote above from Minnesota DNR saying, well, if you destroyed 1,000 acres of peatland, that's going to have a significant impact on Minnesota's total annual emission of carbon dioxide. Okay, so this is telling us that simply constructing that Twin Metals mine would have a significant impact on Minnesota's total annual emission of carbon dioxide. Okay, I took that number of 2.7 million tons and I spread that out over 25 years of mine operation. And I still get quite a substantial annual rate of carbon dioxide production. But you're going to see quite a slug of carbon dioxide in the first 1, 2, 3 years.
Great, thank you, Dr. Emerman. We have some other questions here. Maybe I'll address a couple of these. We have a question here. Isn't PolyMet also avoiding best available control technology for air emission by claiming a mine size that is 3 times smaller than the size they've told investors? And that is indeed the case here. That pertains to particulate matters less than 10 microns, where they are avoiding that status as a major air emission. And the Minnesota Court of Appeals agreed with the challenges that the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy and ourselves have brought to on that challenge. And so that is now before the Minnesota Supreme Court, and we're awaiting a decision in that. So PolyMet is also, with respect to this major source status, been playing games as well here. And we have another question from Amanda here regarding about other concerns with respect to Twin Metals and PolyMet regarding the impacts on water. And yes, that we are very concerned with that. And Dr. Emerman in a previous presentation spoke about Twin Metals' impact on water quality. And we've had other presentations about PolyMet's impact on water quality as well. So this is placing the multiple dimensions of the problems that PolyMet and Twin Metals create, and today we're specifically zeroing in on how the climate change impact of these mines here. Then I'm trying to. There's a question about how people in the city of Duluth will respond to the increase in truck traffic. That is obviously an important issue for local officials as well as state officials and folks that are viewing this that are residents of Duluth. Please contact your local officials and your state legislators to impact your concern on that. And while we're here, I want to thank all the members of the Duluth delegation that are supporting Prove It First, and in particular, State Senator Jen McEwen, who is the lead sponsor of Prove It First. There are questions here relating to the benefits of recycling, and we'll be addressing that as well about that the copper that we're generating in the United States right now. That maybe this is the question for you, Dr. Emerman. It's not the focus of this study of yours, but I believe you've looked at it. What will happen with the copper that comes out of these mines? Is it used in the U.S.? Is it shipped to China? Where will it go?
Okay, this is a good question. Okay, because people always talk about that. The U.S. needs copper, Minnesota needs copper. Okay. But nothing about this copper has anything to do with Minnesota or the U.S., okay? The plan is that a Chilean company in Minnesota will extract a copper concentrate, and a Swiss company in Minnesota will extract copper and nickel concentrate, and they will ship that. They will ship that wherever they want to ship that. They'll ship that someplace for refining. It's most likely is China, just because so much refining goes on in China right now, but it's not the only place, okay? And then a Chinese state-owned company will then sell the copper to who they want for the price they want. It's got nothing to do with Minnesota's needs for copper or the U.S.'s need for copper. It has a lot more to do with the desire of a Chilean company and a Swiss company to make money in Minnesota.
Great, thank you, Steve. We have a question here from Nicomas here about how do these mines affect the ceded territory of the Anishinaabe, and great question there. Both of these mines are in the 1854 treaty area, the ceded territories, and so that treaty covers this area here, and so the Native nations of Fond du Lac, of Grand Portage, and Bois Forte all have rights that are implicated by this. And what's happened here is that that these rights are not being respected. The Fond du Lac band in particular has been very active in the issues related to PolyMet and the impact that PolyMet would have on the water quality standards that the Fond du Lac band has established. So it is an essential part of the conversation here, and that Native voices have not been heard on. So. Megwich, thank you so much, Nicomas, for that important question. And you know, I guess as we're kind of nearing the end of this, we'll try to answer all your questions perhaps offline here. Perhaps you could go back to the very last slide, Dr. Emerman, here of the presentation.
Here?
The very last one.
This one?
And then one more here. One more here.
Oh.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize that was there.
So, please contact us through our website for follow-up questions on this. We'll try to respond to all those. In addition to providing important technical information such as what we've done this afternoon here, we love the Boundary Waters, and we know that you do as well, and we want to share that love with you. And we have an upcoming presentation, tips and tricks for winter camping in the Boundary Waters on Wednesday, February 24th. The winter camping season from here into March and even early April here is sometimes some of the best winter camping with the long days and somewhat milder temperatures. So please put that on your calendar for the next lunch with the friends on February 24th at 12 noon Central Time. Again, I want to thank Dr. Emerman for this great presentation that's really goes through in detail of what's behind the climate change impact of Twin Metals and PolyMet. And I want to thank all of you that you're part of this community of Friends of the Boundary Waters Wilderness and part of the community of people that care about the future of the Boundary Waters, the greater Quetico Superior ecosystem, and all the people of Minnesota. This is a statewide and national issue. So have a great rest of the afternoon, and thank you for being here.
Okay, thank you for coming.
Goodbye.